Now we're in the part of the course that discusses designing your own patterns and getting them accepted by a catalog of design patterns. And this is certainly possible to design your own patterns, and the pattern community is wide and it's open, and there are many design pattern catalogs on the internet. You can submit your own design patterns to those catalogs and get them accepted perhaps, and get them listed as well. And the more design pattern catalogs you get them listed in, your patterns listed in, the more widely accepted your pattern will be. So, for example, you might want to submit your design pattern to a catalog such as the one you've already seen, which is the Cunningham and Cunningham Design Pattern Catalog at http://c2.com. And when you design your own pattern and you submit it to a design pattern catalog, you'll typically be asked to fill out 10 different steps in the design pattern submission process. The intent of the pattern, which shows what problem it's meant to solve. The motivation is a concrete application or a concrete use of your pattern. Applicability discusses how widely and under what circumstances your pattern can be used. The structure lists perhaps a diagram of the pattern, showing how the pattern works. Participants talks about the classes and objects that participate in the pattern. Collaborations shows how to collaborate with how the parts of the participants of the pattern actually collaborate and make the pattern work. Consequences lists both the good and bad consequences of the pattern. Then you have perhaps some sample code, and then you suggest known uses. So known uses should be real world issues that the pattern has been used in, and then a section on related patterns to show how your pattern relates to other patterns. We'll talk about these 10 different points inside the design pattern catalog submission process in the coming movies, starting with the intent in this one. So let's say that, for example, you have a design pattern you want to submit. Let's make one up right now. This design pattern is going to be called the Veto design pattern. And the Veto design pattern is for mission critical code. For example, you might have code that's responsible for launching a missile, and you don't want the missile to be launched unless every part of the code agrees, but your code may have gotten so extenuated, so distributed, that you don't know whether or not you're actually making sure that all parts of the code agree before your missile is launched. And so therefore you can explicitly make a veto process occur. It might be something like this, might look something like this, and you have your code check for a veto by sending a message through a set of links. Each one of these links can veto the request, for example, for launching a missile, and then you process the results. And that's the idea here. You have to take out of your code the code that actually will do the vetoing, and rather than having your vetoing code spread throughout your normal core code, you're not sure whether or not it's actually being used correctly and whether or not all the conditions are being used correctly. Instead, you're going to encapsulate your vetoing code and put them into these links. So a message has to successfully transmit itself through all those links in order to be a successful request, a non-vetoed request, and if any of the links decides to veto a request, it can do so. So that's going to be our veto design pattern. And the idea, once again, is to take code that has veto power in it, but however you're concerned that the veto power is distributed too widely around the code, you're not sure if the process is under control. So the idea is to take the veto code out, encapsulate it expressly to make sure that your veto code is working as it should, and then set up a chain of links that allow a message to be vetoed or not, and if the message is not vetoed, you can process the results and perhaps, for example, launch the missile. And if the message is vetoed, then you would not launch the missile. Okay, so that is the veto design pattern, just a suggested design pattern, a sample design pattern that doesn't actually exist in the world yet, but exists here as a object of study for our discussion about creating your own design patterns. And you have to first start off with the intent. As you recall, the intent was the first of the 10 steps, the 10 items you have to list when you're submitting to a design pattern catalog. So we're going to start off with the intent for the veto design pattern. And the intent is going to be listed here. You have to make up an official sounding sentence, and this is going to be the intent of the veto pattern. Process a vetoable request by sending it through a chain of encapsulated objects, each of which can veto that request. So that's the kind of phraseology you have to use when you're going to design your own design pattern. That's our intent. Process a vetoable request by sending it through a chain of encapsulated objects, each of which can veto that request. Okay, so that is the intent of the veto design pattern. And now we're going to keep going with the next steps, talking about the motivation of the design pattern next. And going to go walk through all the 10 steps here, and going to make sure that our veto design pattern is in good shape in order to be submitted to actual design pattern catalogs. So that was the intent of the veto design pattern, which is to process a vetoable request by sending it through a chain of encapsulated objects, each of which can veto that request. Okay, so that's the veto design pattern, and we have done the intent. Coming up next is the motivation.